which is so prevalent, unfortunately, in many lupus patients. So this is kind of where we are at. Where do we take it from here? And luckily, there are many good approaches where we can and where we will be able to approach this and start to block this. So that is one of the main aims currently at our lab, to try to understand how can we address this, how can we try to help and prevent any of this from happening. One thing that is in development is something called a C5a receptor inhibitor. And that is something that will attack or block complement. I think most of you will be familiar with complement being an important part of the disease. So this particular inhibitor blocks certain parts of the complement that is involved in recruiting cells. So if we block this process, our immune cells will no longer go into the tissue, they will no longer destroy it, and therefore you will have reduced organ damage. There are also ways to block the traps themselves. There is enzymes or scissors, if you would, that could cut up and destroy those big traps and reduce their ability to be dangerous. Many companies are also developing drugs to target inflammation in itself. Certain, so either inflammatory mediators or their kind of sensors. And one that is in clinical phase 3, so hopefully soon to be on the market, is a treatment called anifrolumab, which it seems to be very hopeful and should be hopefully on the market soon. One we did also discuss was of course belimumab, which will block BAFF, which is currently being used, and it's the most recent drug for lupus patients. And then finally, as we discussed in our lab, one could target the nuclear plants. We call them mitochondrial inhibitors. That is something to be explored. What many companies are also developing are so-called IPADs, inhibitors of PAD. And PAD are those kind of molecules, if you would, that participate in this vomiting process. So if we can block the vomiting, we will also reduce a lot of this problem. And then finally, one could of course target further upstream. One could target the B cells. Many of you have experience with rituximab, which will of course hinder this altogether. At our lab, or our division I should say, we have developed this drug called RSLV132, which breaks down the actual immune complexes, hindering them from being recognized by immune cells. There is a local company that is working in that. I think it's in clinical phase 2 currently, and it looks very promising. And I used to work with another drug called NDOS in Sweden, characterizing that, and that is also very promising for many autoimmune conditions. Again, acting to destroy the immune complexes, and thus not allowing them to be inflammatory or activate any cell. So there is for sure good hope for the future, and we're having many good treatments coming up to help explore and hopefully reduce the long-term organ damage in lupus patients. But until then, we're also using many of those markers to try to better monitor patients. We want to better understand, can we help the clinicians to guide them and say, how is the patient doing today? What is happening? What treatments should I give them to get best efficiency? And more so, can we today find something that will predict how this patient will do in 5 years or 10 years? Can we say to the clinicians that this patient is likely to develop kidney issue or cardiovascular disease? If so, we would like to intervene early. We want to prevent it. And that is one thing that we're working on currently, finding those markers that can tell you about your long-term progression and hopefully help to decrease the disabilities. With that, I would like to thank all of my colleagues and collaborators. I did not present on all of those, but they are all involved in those projects. I would like to thank Wilma and all of you for your attention. We'll be happy to take questions.
So I have to say, when Dr. Liu gave me his slide presentation, I looked at it without his narration, obviously. Like, wow, I'm not going to understand this. You did a great job, so thank you. So we're going to take 10 minutes for questions and answers to Dr. Liu. I will want to preface it by saying if you can keep your answers or your questions rather general, Dr. Liu will be available during the break to answer any specific questions. So Does anyone have any questions now? And if so, please project.
I just wanted to know, so when you talk about the nets forming, are they always in autoimmunity only, or does it happen when it's supposed to? Is it ever supposed to happen?
Oh, it is a very physiological process. So it happens in me when I have an infection, for instance.
Okay.
So we need a process. So when the neutrophil encounters bacteria or fungi, this will happen. But it's just the cleaning process that is not doing well in lupus patients. And since we're not able to clean them up, then they linger around and then they cause damage. So it's more about cleaning them up first.
I'm just curious if the DNA leaving the cells, is that being replaced in the mitochondria afterwards, or is that mitochondria itself destroyed and out of order after that?
It is very much destroyed. It's a great question. It's very much destroyed. It's being thrown out and not being able to, likely not being able to do anything now. We're looking into that, what happens with it once it's being thrown out. There's some very new, yes.
Oh, I was just curious to see what pathway it uses. Like, I mean, is it like potassium ion channels, or is it like, how does it get the
So,
DNA out?
so likely it's not an active process, but likely it's throwing out the full mitochondria. And if it's not cleared, it's being broken up because it's being very damaged by the oxidation. And that means that it loses its membrane potential and eventually it will just be destroyed. So it's not supposed to leak it out, but due to damage it will. But it could be active processes as well.
Okay.
Now,
Thank you.
Any other questions?
What was given to the mouse to help ease its symptoms?
so there are many models. You said the lupus model.
To that mouse, you said that you eased its mitochondria, or
It's called mitotempo. It's a mitochondrial loss. So it's we call it scavenger. It's something to remove oxygen radicals, particularly in the mitochondria.
okay.
It can be given to mice. I don't know if it can be given to humans. The tricky part is that we, of course, need our power plants. We need them to generate some amount of oxygen radicals to give good energy. So it's a balance, kind of how much we can block it and how much we can promote it. But overall, blocking that process, I think, is promising, but maybe not with the same drug. That's good.
Is all the research that's being done to treat cancer with attacking the tumors, does that inform this kind of science too?
That's a great question. Yes, I mean, we have been working with many companies, and the kind of overall concept is that what affects, I mean, autoimmunity and malignancy being opposite. So usually we can target the same pathways, but we just turn them around. So we do work with a lot of oncologists as well, and looking at those pathways where it seems like they are protecting the tumor. So something that will protect the tumor will often lead to autoimmunity instead. So we do collaborate with them.
Any other questions? Yeah, go for it.
I was just curious if this is applicable. You know, I've been told that lupus is kind of a spectrum of different facets of that, and so is it applicable to kind of everything under that category, or is this only a specific?
Great question. So that's what we're hoping to do with some of those, we call them biomarkers, to see if we can measure levels of NETs. As I mentioned, or as I showed you, some of the patients have highly elevated levels, such as the ones that have kidney inflammation. And usually they are the ones that have mainly this phenomenon. So we think that we can identify certain patients, and that will then inform the clinician as well, how can I treat it. So I agree with you, it will be subgroups, probably.
What about when you are measuring the level of NETs in the patients? Would that happen in a normal blood test, or is that just something done specifically in a lab?
Currently it's in the lab. There are no commercial tests. We are reaching out to companies and trying to get these into clinical practice. Also lab medicine here in Seattle. So hopefully it could be done. So we're trying to, yes, establish it as a new lab test that could help long term.
What's the timetable on a lot of this research? How long does it take to kind of go through and test some of the things that you're testing?
With the company or
Well,
to develop a drug?
yeah, just in progress. Like, how long do we have to wait for new stuff to come out and be
Right.
approved? And
So biomarkers are quick, are usually quick. So things to monitor disease is not too bad. When we want to give things to individuals, that could take quite a few years, unfortunately. Some of the ones that I mentioned are already in clinical trials, and then they should be fairly close to being on the market if they're successful. But if we're still talking about years, we have to comment.
No more questions? All right, well, thank you, Dr. Luke, appreciate it.
That was a terrific presentation. Something very complicated made a little easier for everyone to understand. Our second speaker is Max Brown. After graduating from the University of Washington in 2008, Max got his start working as a field organizer for the Obama campaign in rural Oregon. Max has held positions in the Pacific Northwest and Washington, D.C., and has worked for, among others, the Martin Luther King County Labor Council, Planned Parenthood Federation of America. In 2016, Max led the organized campaign in Washington State, where he managed the grassroots mobilization programs for Hillary Clinton, Patty Murray, and Jay Inslee. Currently, Max works as a consultant in the Des Moines Consulting Group, where he advocates and helps find the right mix of public affairs and grassroots tactics to impact decision-making at the federal policy level. Please welcome to the floor, Max Brown.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Not yet? Maybe now? Oh, hello. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Is this good? Are we in a Verizon version? Okay. Great. Hi, and thank you for the warm introduction. I sure appreciate the opportunity to be here. I was asked to come give a quick presentation on just kind of what's happening in healthcare policy right now. There's been a lot of back and forth around a lot of issues, including the Affordable Care Act in the last 2 years. There's always ongoing conversations around Medicare, Medicaid funding, as well as conversations around how we continue to fund the good work that Dr. Lude is doing in coming up with new therapies and cures and discoveries. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time here just to kind of give you some perspective from what I'm tracking or what I'm seeing in kind of the healthcare policy space. I'll add that my work is primarily federal government facing in nature, so a lot of things I'm going to talk about here are kind of what's going on in DC, for better or for worse. But I'm happy to take questions at the end if y'all have any follow-up items you'd like to click through. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Oh, great. Okay, awesome. Okay, great. So our agenda for today, sorry, I kind of already talked through this a little bit. I want to talk about just kind of what's going on with the Affordable Care Act, given the amount of activity that particular piece of legislation has seen in the last year and a half and may continue to see moving forward. I want to talk about kind of the state of research funding through the National Institutes of Health. The NIH is the organization that helps fund programs like the ones that exist here at Denver. We're also going to talk about Medicaid and Medicare. And then, Lauren and Willa asked me to, as a part of this presentation, kind of talk about advocacy and what does it mean to influence policy outcomes from your perspective as an advocate and as an activist and a citizen. How can you kind of get in the fight a little bit and help make things happen? So in that, we'll talk about the motivations of elected officials and then some tactics around being an effective advocate. So let's go ahead and just get going. Okay, so the Affordable Care Act has been a lot of action on this in the last year and a half or so. I thought it would be good to just kind of do a quick history lesson, just so we kind of know, where did this come from, what was it, and that will kind of inform a lot of our conversation later when we talk about kind of further efforts to reform. So when President Barack Obama was elected, it was one of his top stated objectives to pass a large reform package targeted towards healthcare in this country. He had a lot of provisions in mind that became a part of the final package, and I've qualified them here as popular and not popular things. I realize this is a highly subjective assessment, deciding what's popular and not popular. I will say I put these things into categories primarily from my experience in elections and campaigns in 2010. I was working for Senator Patty Murray. And the things that when we would call voters and survey them to kind of get a sense of where they were in the election that they didn't like, and overall I put in the not popular column. And the things that would then become sort of, our talking points as we were supporting the senator's re-election efforts, and the Affordable Care Act was a big deal in 2010, as you may recall. I've put in the popular column. So this is like, the story that, we would tell in support of candidates who supported the Affordable Care Act, and these are like, the story that the other side would kind of tell about us, and they were trying to, defeat people who supported that particular part of legislation, or piece of legislation. So I'll also qualify this by saying, as you can tell from my introduction there, I have a particular ideological predisposition that's informed by my upbringing and having worked for certain elected officials. So I'm going to try to, keep that aside and just kind of give you, as straightforward kind of just the facts presentation as we can. Okay, so the Affordable Care Act, in the popular column, we can go back one slide if you don't mind. In the popular column, first and foremost, the Affordable Care Act meant a huge expansion in Medicaid, and Medicaid is the government program that, a federal government program that allows states to provide basic health care services for low-income families. So first and foremost, the Affordable Care Act expanded that eligibility criteria so more people were considered eligible for kind of basic health care services under that program. It also eliminated pre-existing conditions. So before the Affordable Care Act passed, a lot of insurance companies, could decide not to cover you for different reasons. If you had cancer, that could be a pre-existing condition. If you were pregnant, that would be an example of a pre-existing condition that insurance companies would decide not to cover people for. So it eliminated that kind of pre-existing conditions stuff. Elimination of lifetime insurance limits. So, some insurance plans had sort of a limit on how much benefit they could give you over the course of your lifetime. So, as you can imagine, if you're dealing with a chronic condition or cancer or something that is typically more expensive to treat, patients were hitting their caps, and the insurance company was no longer helping them pay